Everyone ignored the little beggar girl outside the private clinic, until the billionaire's dying son whispered, "Please, bring her back." The sky over Manhattan was smeared in ash-gray clouds, thick and swollen with rain. It had been pouring since morning, and the sidewalks were nothing more than rivers of cold, oily water. People rushed past with umbrellas and expensive coats, never once noticing the small figure curled behind the dumpster outside Granger Medical Tower. Lila Monroe, barefoot and trembling, pressed her back against the cold brick wall, clutching a plastic bag that held everything she owned: a broken watch, a ribbon that once belonged to her mother, and a half-eaten granola bar she had saved for later. She was 11 years old, and she had been alone for what felt like forever. Her dark hair hung in wet strands around her face, her cheeks hollow from hunger. Since arriving in New York 2 weeks ago, she'd been sleeping under overpasses, sneaking into public libraries for warmth, and digging through trash bins behind restaurants for food she never begged. Not because she didn't need to, but because people treated her worse when she did, as if her voice somehow made her more real, and that was something they didn't want to see. Today was different, though. Something pulled her toward the clinic. Not the scent of food, not the heat coming from the back vents. Something else. Something she didn't have a name for. She watched the glass doors from across the alley, hidden beneath a warped metal scaffold. She had seen this place every day since she'd started wandering this block. Private, quiet. Guards sometimes stood out front. Wealthy people in luxury cars pulled up and disappeared inside. Then the black SUV arrived. It was larger than the others. Sleek, tinted windows. No license plate she could read. It stopped abruptly at the private entrance. 2 men in suits jumped out and opened the rear door. A third man stepped out, tall, with streaks of silver in his hair, a navy coat clinging to his expensive frame. He opened the backseat door, and then Lila saw him. A boy. Maybe 14 or 15. Too thin. His arms looked like sticks wrapped in skin. His head lolled weakly against the man's chest as he was lifted out, cradled like a child. His eyes were shut tight, but there was something about the way his fingers twitched, as if he was trying to hold on to something he couldn't see. The man holding him barked a sharp order toward the entrance, and a nurse came running out with a wheelchair, but the man refused. He carried the boy himself, one hand steadying the boy's neck, the other wrapped around his legs. And for a brief second, as they passed under the light above the door, the boy opened his eyes. He looked directly at Lila. It was less than a moment, just a flicker, but it stopped time. His eyes were green, glassy, full of something she couldn't name. Pain, maybe. But something more. Plea. The door shut behind them. The SUV pulled away. Rain kept falling. Lila stayed in that spot for hours. She didn't move. Her fingers had gone numb, but her heart beat hard in her chest. She didn't understand what she had seen, but she felt it. Felt it like a string had been tied from her heart to his. That night, after darkness swallowed the street and the last shift nurse went out to dump trash, Lila saw her chance. The door clicked open and she slipped in behind the woman unnoticed, her bare feet silent on the tile. Inside, the hall smelled like lemons and antiseptic. Lights buzzed above. She ducked into a closet and waited, her breathing quiet, her eyes adjusting. Then she crept down the hall, looking in every room. Most were empty. One had an elderly man asleep with a breathing mask. Another held a baby in an incubator. But at the very end of the corridor, a door stood open just an inch. A soft beeping came from within, slow, steady, like a clock counting down. She pushed it open slowly. There he was, the same boy, lying in a hospital bed surrounded by machines and tubes. His face was turned toward the window, mouth slightly open. He looked even smaller now. A whiteboard next to his bed read, "Everett Langford, age 15, Type 1 SMA, palliative observation only. DNR." Lila didn't know what SMA was, but DNR made her chest hurt. She had seen it once before when she'd snuck into a hospital room with an older girl from the shelter. It meant, do not resuscitate. It meant dying. She didn't know why she stepped inside, but she did. Quietly, carefully. She moved closer, hands at her sides, barely breathing. Then his eyes opened again. "You're not a nurse," he whispered. Lila froze. His voice was a scratch of air. "No," she whispered back. "I'm no one." His lips twitched, almost smiling. "Then stay no one." She stood there in silence. There was a cup of applesauce on the side table. A plastic spoon lay next to it. She picked it up. Her fingers were shaking. Everett didn't stop her. He couldn't lift his arms, could barely turn his head. She scooped a small bite and brought it to his lips. He opened his mouth. She fed him, slowly, carefully, as if it mattered more than anything else in the world. And for the first time in her life, Lila Monroe felt like she had a purpose. Like someone needed her. Like she wasn't invisible. She sat with him for 2 hours that night, until the monitors beeped sleep mode and his eyes closed again. Then she crept out the way she came. No one saw her leave. No one, except the hidden camera above the door that recorded everything, including the girl who wasn't supposed to be there, and the boy who smiled for the first time in months. The next morning, Everett's private room was filled with soft light filtering through the tall windows. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving behind damp sidewalks and a sky washed in pale gold. Nurse Maribel adjusted the IV tube with practiced hands, humming softly to herself. She glanced at the untouched food tray on the side table, raising an eyebrow. "Strange," she muttered under her breath. "Someone's been feeding you." Everett didn't respond. His face was turned to the window, his eyes open but unfocused. He looked worse than yesterday. His breathing was shallow. His fingertips were bluish. The doctors had said the end was near. Weeks, maybe. Days, even. She brushed his hair back gently and left the room. Everett listened to her footsteps fade away, and then ever so faintly, he smiled. He remembered the girl, the one with bare feet and a gentle hand, the one who whispered, "I'm no one," and stayed with him as if his life still mattered. He didn't know her name, didn't even know if she was real. Maybe he dreamed her up. But the taste of applesauce still lingered in his mouth, and it hadn't been there before. He waited all day for her to return. Meanwhile, Lila sat in her usual spot behind the dumpster, clutching her knees to her chest. She hadn't slept. Her mind kept replaying the sound of Everett's voice, the fragile way he'd said, "Then stay." It was like he had trusted her without even knowing why. No one had ever looked at her like that before. Not as a problem, not as a nuisance, but as someone who belonged. But what was she doing? This was a rich kid. He had nurses, machines, people who probably paid thousands a day just to keep him alive. She was just a girl with no shoes and a ribbon in her pocket. Yet she couldn't shake the feeling that something about him called to her, like they were two halves of a broken mirror. By nightfall, she made her decision. She waited for the last staff member to leave through the side door, then snuck in again, weaving through hallways like a ghost. When she reached Everett's room, the door was already slightly ajar. He was awake this time, watching the door. As soon as he saw her, a light bloomed in his tired eyes. "I was hoping you'd come back," he said, barely louder than a breath. Lila stepped inside, shutting the door gently behind her. "I wasn't sure I should. I'm glad you did." She sat beside him, pulling the stool closer. The same applesauce sat on the tray, replaced fresh, untouched. She lifted the spoon again. This time he opened his mouth without hesitation. "I'm Everett," he said after the first bite, "but they just call me the Langford boy. Like I'm already gone." Lila hesitated, then smiled faintly. "I'm Lila." Everett blinked, memorizing it. "Lila, that's a real name." She nodded. "But I've been no one for a long time." "Not to me." She kept feeding him, pausing only to wipe the corner of his mouth with a napkin. He asked questions slowly, resting between each sentence. Where did she come from? Why was she alone? Was she scared? She didn't answer much, but he didn't press. Instead, he told her what no one else knew, that the doctors gave him 6 months to live, and that was 3 months ago. That his muscles were shutting down. That his father had stopped coming, too afraid to watch him fade. That he didn't want pity. He wanted someone to talk to him like he was still a boy and not a dying project. And that night, that's what she gave him. They talked about the stars, about books neither of them had read, about what kind of food she missed most. Real food, not from a dumpster. Mac and cheese, she said, with the crusty part on top. He laughed, really laughed. And when his chest began to ache from it, he whispered, "Thank you. I forgot what it felt like." Before she left that night, she held his hand gently in hers. Her fingers were cold, but Everett didn't let go until he fell asleep. His breathing steadied, his heart monitor calmed. For the first time in weeks, he slept without medication. She slipped out as quietly as she came in. No one saw her again, except for a man in a tailored gray suit, sitting in a dark room upstairs, watching the security feed from Everett's room on a screen. His jaw was tight, his eyes unreadable. And when Lila leaned in and tucked the blanket around Everett's shoulders, he slowly leaned forward, narrowing his gaze. Then, without a word, he picked up the phone. "Find out who that girl is." 2 days passed. Lila hadn't returned. Everett stared at the door every time a shadow passed in the hallway, his heart leaping with hope, only to feel it crash each time it wasn't her. His body felt weaker. Breathing was harder. Even swallowing took more effort now. But it wasn't the illness that made his chest ache most. It was the silence. The unbearable quiet that filled the room since Lila had vanished. He tried asking the nurses if anyone had seen her. They gave him polite smiles, told him he was imagining things, and changed the subject. One nurse even said, "Maybe it was just a dream, sweetie." Everett didn't respond, because deep down he knew it wasn't. Meanwhile, across the city, Lila sat curled up in an abandoned storage room behind a grocery store, arms wrapped tightly around her stomach. She hadn't eaten since the last banana peel she found in the trash. Her legs ached, and her lips were cracked. The night before, she'd nearly been caught by 2 officers doing rounds. She knew if they picked her up again, they'd send her back to foster care, or worse, juvie. No one cared that she'd run away from abuse. All they saw was another mouth to feed. She thought about Everett constantly, his eyes, his broken smile. The way he'd said, "Not to me," when she told him she was no one. A part of her wanted to run back, to sit beside him and make him laugh again. But another part, the part beaten down by years of rejection, told her she didn't belong there. He was the son of a millionaire. She was a street rat. Eventually someone would kick her out. Maybe it was better if she disappeared before they made her disappear. But someone had noticed. Not just Everett. Silas Langford stood in his office on the 12th floor of Langford Industries, staring at a paused frame on his monitor. It showed a skinny girl, no older than 11, leaning over his son's bed, spooning applesauce into Everett's mouth with quiet care. Her expression wasn't pity, it was something else. Focused, gentle, present. He didn't know how she had gotten into the building. Security had combed every angle of the footage. No pass card, no name. She just slipped in from the shadows, like a ghost. But she made Everett smile. He hadn't seen that smile in over a year. Silas didn't believe in accidents. He didn't believe in sentiment either. Not since his wife died. Not since Everett's diagnosis. He'd built an empire by eliminating uncertainty, controlling outcomes. But this girl, she wasn't in the plan. She didn't fit into his world of contracts and clinical trials and specialists flown in from Switzerland. Yet here she was, and Everett was better? That same night, Lila wandered back toward Granger Medical Tower, unable to stop herself. She hadn't made up her mind to go inside, just to see it from across the alley, just to look. The lights were on, as always. Nurses came and went. Somewhere inside, Everett was probably sleeping, or maybe her stomach twisted. That's when a hand landed on her shoulder. She spun around, heart hammering, ready to run. But the man behind her didn't grab her. He simply looked at her with a quiet intensity. "You're the girl who's been with my son?" he said. Lila froze. He wore a charcoal gray coat, no umbrella despite the drizzle. His hair was streaked with silver, and his eyes looked like the kind of man who'd never heard the word no. "I'm not going to hurt you," he added. "I just want to talk." Lila swallowed hard. "I didn't steal anything." "I know." Silas paused, then motioned toward a nearby bench beneath an awning. "Will you sit?" Every instinct screamed to run, but something deeper, maybe exhaustion, maybe that unexplainable thread that always tugged her back to Everett, made her nod. She sat. He sat beside her, leaving a respectful gap. "You fed him," he said quietly. "Twice." Lila stared at her feet. "He was hungry. He has nurses. He has round-the-clock care. They're paid more per month than most people earn in a year." Lila didn't answer. "But none of them got him to eat. None of them made him laugh." Still, she stayed silent. Silas turned toward her. "What's your name?" She hesitated. "Lila." He nodded slowly. "Lila, you don't live in a shelter?" "No." "Are you alone?" She didn't answer, but the truth was already there. Silas leaned forward, clasping his hands. "Everett doesn't have much time." Lila's throat tightened. "I know," she whispered. "And yet, the night you came, his vitals improved. The monitors don't lie." Lila said nothing, but her jaw clenched. Silas's voice grew softer. "Whatever you did, whoever you are, you made my son feel alive again. That's not nothing." She blinked hard, staring down at the concrete. "I don't want your money," she said, barely audible. "I'm not offering money." He stood. "I'm offering a room, a bed, a meal, and a chance to be with him, if you want it." She looked up at him, disbelieving. Silas nodded. "There's a door on the side. You'll find it unlocked tonight." Then he walked away, disappearing into the mist. Lila sat there long after he was gone, heart racing. This was a trap, wasn't it? It had to be. People didn't do things like that. Not for someone like her. And yet she stood, slowly, her legs weak, her chest tight, and for the second time she slipped into the building. Not like a thief this time, but like someone who had been expected. Lila crept through the hall like before, but everything felt different this time. The fear hadn't vanished, but it was quieter now, replaced by something else she hadn't felt in years. Permission. The side door had been exactly where the man said it would be, propped open by a small rubber wedge, like it was left there just for her. No alarms, no locked doors, no voices shouting for her to get out. Her feet padded silently along the cold tile, but the air no longer felt hostile. The hallway lights glowed gently as she passed by closed doors. She didn't need to peek inside any of them this time. She knew exactly where to go. The turn, the end of the corridor, that soft sound of monitors she already knew by heart. When she stepped into Everett's room, he was awake, lying still against the pillows. He turned his head slightly, eyes meeting hers the moment she appeared in the doorway. His mouth opened in surprise, then curved into the smallest smile. "You came back," he whispered. Lila nodded and stepped closer. "Didn't think I would?" "I hoped," he said, "but people like you don't come back." Her brow furrowed as she sat on the stool beside him. "What do you mean, people like me?" Everett took a shallow breath, wincing a little. "People who feel real. Not just faces with gloves and clipboards. I'm just a kid with no shoes. And I'm just a body on a countdown." His voice was dry, but his tone held no self-pity. It was a truth he'd learned to wear like a coat. "But when you're here, I don't feel like I'm dying." Lila didn't know what to say to that. So instead, she reached for the pudding cup on the tray and peeled the lid back with steady fingers. "You hungry?" He nodded faintly. Spoon by spoon, she fed him again. It took time. He had to pause often, his throat growing tired. But he didn't take his eyes off her once. And when he coughed softly and a bit of pudding dribbled down his chin, Lila laughed gently and wiped it off with the corner of a napkin. "You're bad at this," she teased. "I'm out of practice." They sat in quiet after that, the monitors filling the space with their rhythm. Outside, the wind rustled the branches of the trees just beyond the window. Inside, time felt slower, softer. "Do you believe in miracles?" Everett asked suddenly. Lila blinked. "Like what? Angels and magic?" "No," he said, "like things you can't explain. That still change everything." She considered it. "I don't know. My life's not really the kind that gets miracles." "Maybe that's exactly why it could," he whispered, "because you'd believe it when it happened." Lila looked at him closely. His skin was pale, his body fragile, but his eyes, they still burned with something bright. Not hope exactly, something braver, a kind of defiance. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out her ribbon. It was faded, light blue, the last thing her mother gave her before the sickness took her. She held it out in her palm. "This is all I have," she said. "It's stupid, I know, but I used to tie it in my hair when I was scared. Made me feel like someone still cared." Everett looked at it with quiet reverence. "It's not stupid." She hesitated, then slowly tied it around his wrist. His skin was cool and fragile beneath her fingers, but the gesture felt steady, like she was anchoring something. Him, maybe, or herself. "There," she said. "Now you've got something to hold on to, too." They didn't speak after that. She just sat beside him, and he drifted into sleep, one hand loosely curled around the ribbon on his wrist. But outside the room, Silas Langford stood watching from the other side of the glass. He hadn't meant to stay late. He'd only intended to confirm the girl was safe. But he couldn't pull himself away from the sight of his son who had spent months in silence, whose vitals had flatlined twice, who hadn't smiled since the first time the doctors said, "fatal." Everett was sleeping peacefully now. He looked like he wasn't afraid anymore. Silas's chest tightened. It had been so long since he'd seen his boy like that. And this girl, this little ghost who had appeared from nowhere, was the reason. He walked away without a word. That night, Lila stayed longer than usual. She dozed off in the chair beside the bed, her head resting on her knees, one hand still near Everett's. And for the first time since arriving in New York, she didn't dream of running. The next morning, Lila woke to the soft warmth of sunlight pouring through the window. For a moment she didn't remember where she was. Her legs were stiff, her neck ached from sleeping curled up on the chair, but then she turned her head and saw him, Everett, still asleep, his chest rising and falling slowly but steadily. The ribbon was still tied around his wrist. Her ribbon. And just like that, it all came rushing back. She stood, stretching quietly so she wouldn't wake him, and peeked through the window slit. The hospital wing was quiet. Nurses hadn't yet started their morning rounds. She considered slipping away like always, but something stopped her. This time she didn't feel like a trespasser. Then she noticed something strange. At the small table by the bed there was a tray with breakfast, but not hospital food. This was real food. Toast, scrambled eggs, a tiny bottle of orange juice, and another plate, one clearly meant for her. She blinked. Next to the tray was a folded note. Her name was written on it in clean, even handwriting, Lila. She opened it with cautious fingers. "You're welcome here now. Let them know if you need anything. S.L." She froze for a long moment. Her first instinct was suspicion. Nothing in her life had ever been this simple. But then, as she looked at Everett's peaceful face, and the food meant just for her, she realized something else. This was real. She sat down quietly and picked up a piece of toast, eating slowly. She hadn't tasted warm food in days. She didn't cry, but the lump in her throat made swallowing hard. Later that morning, Everett woke. His eyes landed on her immediately, and he smiled, sleepy and soft. His voice was rough from sleep, but steady. "You're still here." "I guess I am." "You look different," he said. She raised an eyebrow. "More alive?" "Yeah," he laughed weakly. "That and happy." They ate breakfast together. Lila fed him carefully. He took longer than usual, his hands even weaker that morning, but his eyes never left hers. She told him about the strange food tray and the note. He looked surprised, then thoughtful. "My dad," he said softly. "He must have left it." "You think he's the one watching us?" I don't think he ever really stopped. He just didn't know what to do anymore. There was a long silence after that. Do you hate him? Lila asked gently. Everett looked toward the window. I used to, but now I just feel sad for him. He's trying in his own way. It's hard for him to see me like this. I think when people love you too much, they look away when it gets ugly. Lila understood that more than she wanted to admit. I used to wish my mom had lived, she whispered. But sometimes I wonder if she did me a favor, leaving before it got worse. Everett turned to her slowly. Don't say that. Why not? It's probably true. Because you're the only good thing that's happened to me in years. And you're not a curse, Lila. You're the only part that isn't. The words hit her deeper than she expected. She looked away, not trusting herself to speak. Later that day, a new nurse came in, not the usual rotating staff. She was older, with kind eyes and a clipboard tucked under her arm. She looked at Lila and smiled as if she'd known her for years. You must be Lila. I'm Nurse Evelyn. You're listed now. You don't need to hide anymore. Lila blinked. Listed? Yes, as a designated comfort companion. It's informal, but you're cleared for access to this wing. Mr. Langford approved it personally. Lila couldn't breathe for a moment. She turned to Everett. He was grinning as much as his weak muscles allowed. You're official, he whispered. That evening, after the nurses did their final checks, Silas Langford appeared in the doorway. He didn't come in immediately, just stood, watching the two of them talk quietly. Everett noticed him first. Dad, he said, his voice stronger than usual. Come in. Silas hesitated, then stepped inside, nodding politely at Lila. She stood, unsure what to say, but Silas surprised her. Don't leave, he said. Please, stay. She sat back down slowly, her heart pounding. He looked at Everett. I came to say thank you. For what? For not giving up. Everett blinked, stunned. Silas continued. And for letting someone in. I didn't know how to help you anymore. I thought the money, the doctors, the silence, that it would protect you from pain. But you didn't need protection. You needed a person. He turned to Lila. And you were that person. Lila opened her mouth but couldn't find any words. Silas looked like he wanted to say more, but instead he simply reached out and rested a hand on Everett's shoulder. I'll come back tomorrow, he said. And he did. That night, Lila sat at Everett's bedside as he drifted off to sleep. She reached for his hand and he reached back, his fingers barely managing to curl around hers. She whispered softly into the quiet room, Maybe miracles are just people showing up. Everett didn't answer, but the tiny smile on his lips said enough. Over the following week, the hospital room transformed, not with decorations or flowers or balloons, those were still banned in the sterile, carefully monitored environment, but with something deeper, almost invisible. The room, once cold and mechanical, now felt like a space where life dared to breathe again. Nurses noticed it first. The monitors beeped with more stability. Everett's vitals, once a source of quiet dread, had stopped their downward spiral. He was eating more, speaking more, smiling, laughing. Lila was there every day now, often before the morning staff arrived, and long after the halls went dark. She brought her own rhythm to the room, stories she made up about worlds in the clouds, poems she whispered into Everett's ear, games they played using only words and imagination. She even started sneaking in pages torn from discarded library books, reading them aloud until Everett fell asleep with a contented sigh. Everett's body was still fragile. His condition hadn't miraculously vanished. But something had changed. An invisible thread had been rewoven between his soul and the world. Doctors were baffled. One of them even pulled Silas aside and said, I don't know how to explain this, but he's stabilizing. He shouldn't be. Silas only nodded. He didn't say it aloud, but he knew exactly how. He'd watched it unfold through the glass night after night. Lila, barefoot at first, now in donated sneakers and a clean hoodie, feeding Everett, singing softly, telling him he mattered. One morning, Everett asked for something impossible. Can we go outside? Lila looked at him, startled. What, like outside? He nodded slowly. Just the hospital garden. I know they have one. I've never seen it. They said it would be too dangerous. But I want to feel air again. I want to see the sky without glass between it and me." Lila hesitated. "I don't think they'll let you." Everett's expression was calm. "Then we'll ask, together." When Nurse Evelyn came in for the morning round, Everett made the request. She frowned at first. "You know we can't risk that, sweetheart. You need a feeding tube, IV meds." "I don't need them for 20 minutes," he said. "Please, just a few minutes. Lila will be there. You will too. My dad can come. You all can watch." The nurse hesitated. Lila added softly, "He needs this." The decision went up the chain. Silas was called. 3 doctors debated, checking vitals and risk charts. But in the end, they agreed, on one condition. The chair would be motorized, oxygen on standby, nurses flanking both sides. It would happen at dawn, when no one else was around. No cameras, no reporters, just a boy, a girl, and the sky. The morning was cool and windless. Lila helped tuck a blanket around Everett's legs, and as they wheeled him down the corridor, she felt his hand brush hers. It was barely a touch, but it grounded her. When they reached the garden, the doors slid open and Everett gasped. There were cherry trees in bloom. The air smelled like grass and dew. A few birds chirped in the stillness. The sun hadn't yet broken fully over the city, but the first light was beginning to kiss the tops of buildings. Lila turned to him. "You okay?" His eyes glistened. "More than okay." He tilted his face toward the sky, breathing deeply through his nose. He smiled like he hadn't in years. His chest rose and fell, not with struggle, but with quiet awe. "It smells like life," he said. "I forgot what life smells like." They sat there for almost 30 minutes, long after the allowed time. No one interrupted them. Not even Silas, who stood quietly a few yards back, watching with his hands in his coat pockets, the look on his face softer than it had ever been. Lila told Everett the names of all the flowers she remembered, though some she made up. He didn't care. He loved them all. She pointed to a bird and made up a story about how it used to be a king cursed to live in feathers. He listened with a smile on his lips and tears in his eyes. Then, slowly, Everett's breathing began to change. It became more shallow. Lila noticed immediately. "Are you okay?" she asked. He nodded once. "Just tired, but not scared." The nurses moved quickly, returning him to his bed. He didn't resist. As they reattached the tubes and monitors, Everett turned to Lila, voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you for bringing me back to the world." Lila leaned down, pressing her forehead gently to his. "Don't go yet. I'm not done telling you stories." Everett closed his eyes, smiling faintly. "Then I'll stay." That night, as Lila slept in the chair by his side, something even more shocking happened. Everett opened his eyes again and moved his hand. Not just a twitch, not just a spasm. His hand lifted, shakily, slowly, but it rose. The nurse on the night shift dropped her clipboard. It wasn't possible. Children with type 1 SMA didn't regain motor function. Everett looked at his hand as if seeing it for the first time. Then he turned to Lila and whispered her name, not weakly, but clearly. Lila. And for the first time the impossible began to bloom. The news of Everett's hand movements spread through Granger Medical Tower like wildfire. Doctors, nurses, and specialists who had quietly written him off began reviewing his charts again with fresh eyes. Every test was rerun, every monitor rechecked. No one had an explanation. The disease didn't reverse, not like this, not ever. And yet Everett had moved, intentionally, clearly. And he'd spoken, not slurred, not strained, but strong and sure. Just one word, Lila. When Lila woke up and saw the group of white coats whispering outside Everett's room, her stomach dropped. She thought something had gone wrong. She rushed in, panic flaring in her chest, only to find Everett awake, fully awake, and looking at her with a brightness that hadn't been there before. "You stayed," he said. She froze, stunned by how steady his voice sounded. "Of course I did." He lifted his hand again. Not much, only a few inches. But it was no mistake. She saw it. Real, fluid movement. Her eyes welled up with tears. "You weren't supposed to," she whispered. Then maybe the rules were wrong. Doctors flooded in behind her then, asking questions, performing reflex tests, scanning his body with handheld devices. Lila stood back, silent, watching the whirlwind around him. It wasn't pity this time. It wasn't quiet resignation. It was hope. It was awe. Silas arrived not long after. He stepped into the room, his usually composed face completely undone. He looked at Everett, his only child, sitting up straighter than he had in months. And for the first time in years, Silas Langford, the cold, calculated billionaire, began to cry. Everett looked at his father, blinking in disbelief. "You're crying?" "I think I forgot how," Silas said, stepping closer. "Until now." Everett reached for him slowly, shakily. Silas grabbed his hand, both of them stunned that it worked, that his son could reach at all. "I thought I was going to lose you," Silas said, his voice trembling. "And I didn't know how to save you." "You didn't have to," Everett whispered. "She did." They both turned to look at Lila. She stood awkwardly near the door, unsure what to do with herself. "I didn't do anything. I just showed up." Silas shook his head. "You gave him something no one else could. Something beyond money, beyond medicine. You gave him a reason." A few days later, a new team of doctors from overseas flew in. Not to say goodbye, but to study the phenomenon. Everett underwent scans, blood tests, neurological evaluations. Every result came back the same. The disease was still present, but something unprecedented was happening. His neurons were firing again. His motor function was gradually recovering. It defied logic, but it was real. And through all of it, Lila stayed. She slept in the recliner by his bed, now dressed in clean clothes donated by the hospital staff. She even had her own ID badge clipped to her hoodie. Lila Monroe, companion access. More shockingly, she had her own bed in the children's ward now, too. No more hiding behind dumpsters. No more sneaking through side doors. The city welfare system, nudged quietly by Silas's influence, began fast-tracking her case. A child psychologist evaluated her. A social worker was assigned. When asked where she wanted to stay long-term, she didn't answer. She only looked at Everett. One night, after visiting hours had technically ended, Silas stayed behind. He walked into Everett's room where Lila was softly singing a lullaby her mother used to hum when they slept in subway stations. When she finished, Silas cleared his throat gently. "I have a question for you, Lila." She looked up, wary. "I want to offer you something. Something permanent. But I don't want you to feel pressured. If you say no, nothing changes between you and Everett. You'll still have a place here, for as long as you need." She sat up straighter, confused. "I'd like to become your legal guardian," Silas said, voice measured. "Not because I feel sorry for you, but because you've already become part of this family. I just want to make it official, if you'll let me." Lila stared at him for a long time. Her entire life had been running. From strangers, from institutions, from the idea of family, which had only ever brought pain. And now this man, this cold, powerful man, was offering her the one thing no one ever had, a home. She looked at Everett, who was smiling at her gently, the ribbon still tied around his wrist. Then she looked back at Silas and whispered, "You really want me?" "I already do," he said. She didn't cry. Not then. She just nodded once, slowly. That night, for the first time in her life, she brushed her teeth with her own toothbrush, in her own bed, under her own blanket. And in the next room, Everett slept peacefully, his heart beating strong, his lungs steady, a miracle unfolding inside him. But the biggest miracle wasn't in his body. It was in the way their lives had found each other, two broken pieces of the world that somehow made something whole. Spring turned to early summer, and Granger Medical Tower became the quiet stage of something no one had expected. Everett Langford, once considered terminal, was walking. It wasn't fast. It wasn't perfect. His legs trembled. His muscles were weak. He still needed help balancing. But the sight of him taking slow, cautious steps down the therapy hallway, his hand gripping Lila's for support, left every nurse in tears and doctors shaking their heads in disbelief. SMA type 1 was not something people beat. It wasn't reversible. And yet, Everett was standing, moving, smiling, living. His case was sent to medical journals. Teams from Johns Hopkins, Harvard, and Mayo Clinic requested access to his records. But Silas declined most of them, not to hide the science, but because he finally understood this wasn't about science. Not really. No chart could explain why a dying boy began healing the moment a homeless girl held his hand and fed him with patience. No paper could describe the electricity between them, or how Everett's heart rate improved the first time Lila whispered his name. Silas Langford had spent his entire life trying to buy certainty, but this had come from somewhere money couldn't touch. Lila now lived with them, not as a guest, not as a charity case, as family. She had her own room on the top floor of the Langford brownstone, overlooking Central Park. It was simple, no chandeliers or marble floors like the rest of the house, but filled with things that mattered: books, soft blankets, a window that opened, and a framed photo on the nightstand of her and Everett in the hospital garden laughing. On the day Everett finally returned home, staff lined the driveway to welcome him. He emerged from the transport van on his own 2 feet, with Silas standing tall beside him and Lila gripping his hand tightly. Reporters waited outside the gate, cameras flashing. One shouted, "Everett, how does it feel to be alive?" Everett paused, then looked at Lila and said, "Like I finally found out why." That night, Silas held a small gathering. Only close staff and a few friends. No press, no cameras. In the living room, Everett sat on the couch with Lila beside him, both dressed simply but radiant with the quiet glow of survival. Midway through dinner, Everett tapped his fork against the glass. The room hushed. "I want to say something," he said. His voice was stronger now, still gentle, but no longer fragile. He turned to Silas. "Dad, you've spent so much of your life trying to protect me from dying that you forgot how to help me live. But I forgive you, because when it really mattered, you listened. You let her in, and she saved me." Silas blinked hard, nodding slowly. Then Everett turned to Lila. "You saved me, Lila. Not just my body, my soul. I was waiting to die. You reminded me what it felt like to be wanted, to be seen." Lila looked down, her throat burning. But Everett reached for her hand and continued. "I know I might still have bad days, and we don't know how long I've got, but however long it is, I want you in it." Lila met his eyes. "I'm not going anywhere." Everyone clapped softly. It wasn't loud or showy, just warm and full of something real. Later that evening, long after the guests had left and the house had gone quiet, Lila and Everett sat under the stars on the rooftop balcony. A warm breeze rustled the trees in the park below. Everett lay on a cushioned chair, wrapped in a blanket, his eyes turned skyward. Lila sat beside him, holding his hand. "You ever think," Everett asked, "about how weird it is that we met at all?" "Every day," she whispered. "I was alone, you were invisible, and now," she said softly, "we're both real." They fell into silence, watching the stars. Then Everett smiled suddenly. "You know, I don't think the miracle was that I lived." "What was it then?" He turned his head toward her. "That you did." Lila stared at him, stunned. "For years," he said, "you survived when no one helped you. You fought to stay kind. You loved when no one loved you back. That's the miracle." She didn't cry. She just gripped his hand tighter. Below them, New York buzzed and pulsed as it always had, but up on that rooftop the world was still, quiet, full. 2 children, one born to money, the other born to nothing, had rewritten the ending they were given. And in the middle of the darkest story imaginable, they had chosen light. In my view, the ending of this story is not just hopeful, it's transformative. It shows that healing doesn't always come from hospitals, or wealth, or even science. Sometimes healing begins with something as simple and as rare as being seen, being needed, and being loved without condition. Everett was given 6 months to live, and yet the very thing that extended his life wasn't a breakthrough drug or a last-minute cure. It was a girl who had nothing, but gave him everything she had: her presence, her time, her story, her ribbon. In doing so, she reminded everyone, Everett, Silas, and even herself, that love has the power to shift what we think is possible. I believe the real miracle in this story isn't just Everett's physical recovery. The real miracle is two broken lives finding purpose in each other. It's about how the most unexpected people can become the answer we never saw coming. Lila wasn't sent by a doctor or hired by a billionaire. She appeared from the street, from struggle, from survival. And in the end, she saved a life that no one else could. This ending reminds us that we don't have to be perfect to be the miracle in someone's life. Sometimes we just have to show up.